Hello and welcome to Back to School Anxiety Camp. Today we are joined by Dr. Erin TeWinkel, and she is the teen wellness warrior. And Erin, thanks so much for chatting with me today. I think this is a really hard season for teens. I don't know about your teen patients, but I know my teen patients are like, it's just a hard season, especially heading back to school, having things not be back to normal. And so I was really, I'm looking to support parents as they support this back to school transition through their kids and talking, through the camp, but with you today, specifically their teenage patients. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. As the teen wellness warrior, I love talking about teens whenever I get the opportunity. So I'm so excited to, help anyone who's listening and just kind of work on some quick tips that they can have kind of getting back to school. Like you said, it's been a tough season, and that's just the reality.
It is.
Yeah.
What are you finding some of the challenges with, when you're talking with teens and they're looking at back to school, what are some of the mental health or anxiety concerns that are coming up for them?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I've seen in my practice since all of this has been going on and the biggest concern from actually the teens and the parents is the sleep component. And kind of how that's playing into able to fall asleep because their minds are kind of like worried about stuff, or the fact that what's happened is because teens naturally, the way that they're developing and where they're at is it's normal for them to want to be up to like midnight or 1 a.m. And then sleep in to like 9 or 10. If we were to just let them be in the wild without having to be anywhere, that's where their natural rhythms would go right now. That's where their developmentally, their rhythm is.
Yeah,
they're just kind of where
that's what their brain likes.
Exactly. So already pre this craziness, that was already where they're at, but they were kind of maybe on a different schedule or going to bed earlier. But now, because things have been online and they've kind of had the luxury and this moment in time to kind of go with those trends. But now going back to school, there's this anxiety of like, okay, and I've been hearing parents like, hey, my teen just like sleeps till noon and then they kind of get up and eat and then they kind of go on their phone and then they kind of stay up late again. And it's just the cycle, like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Because soon they're going to have to they're not going to be able to sleep until noon.
Totally.
So what we've been doing is a lot of coaching basically on the sleep thing and how do we kind of work with sleep and kind of get back to these rhythms that we're facing before without as much anxiety and it being this big stressful extra stress of like, we know how important sleep is, and even teens know how important sleep is.
Totally.
They don't have that same immediate feedback like us as non-teen people. We don't sleep and we feel crappy the next day. They don't really have that. They have energy regardless, right? They're just like, what? So I slept 2 hours, big deal. Like, it's not obvious, right? Like they don't feel the lag. Now they are going to have an issue with focusing, and they are going to have, issues. They're going to be more emotionally unstable. They're like, those things will happen with lack of sleep. It's just, they don't feel it in the same way we feel it. Right. When we say like, how did you only sleep that many hours? We've had practice. We've learned this feeling of like what it's like to be underslept. It's still practice for them. So step one is really just talking about it. It's like, hey, I notice when you're underslept, you're more triggered by these conversations, or you're having a hard time regulating emotions, or you're having a harder time staying focused on a task. The biggest one is, and this is a great tool, I'm going to call it a tool to use with you're talking with your teens about sleep. It's like, okay, what kind of things can you not do if you're underslept, like drive the car? Right. So there's some things like if you're underslept, there's actually things that become unsafe.
Yeah.
So it comes back to this discussion I have with my teens and parents of like this responsibility privilege relationship and their responsibility is getting bigger and their privilege gets bigger as they're coming into adolescence. And how can we work on these boundaries? So it comes into conversations like that. Well, if you're not getting enough sleep, then I don't give you the keys to the car. That's a really like practical thing for teens because they're not thinking about, oh, cognitively at school, I'm going to have a harder time. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But so you got to meet them where they're at. What's their biggest struggle or what's their biggest privilege they enjoy having? It's like, hey, how can you relate this to your sleep?
In a way that that is relatable. You know, it's not irrelevant to say, look, if you haven't achieved enough sleep, you're actually cognitively not capable of being a safe driver. You know, it's the equivalent of driving after drinking in terms of its effects. And so, yeah, that's definitely, you know, a very natural consequence, which in my world, we talk about so much with children. And then I hardly ever hear anybody talking about that with teens. And so it's refreshing.
Yes. Yeah. We talk a lot about, and ideally, like when you're parenting a teen, you're focusing more on those natural consequences versus punishment. Because what we kind of want to avoid, especially going into back to school, and each family's going to have their own rules and boundaries about their family values, about, you know, how they're participating in all the rules, the new rules that are out there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing that teens really understand, is your family can have different rules than other families, but have that conversation. Because that's the other anxiety piece that people happen, like, you know, this family's doing it this way, but we're not comfortable. And it could be for a number of reasons. Like maybe you have an immunocompromised person at home, or that's part of your bubble, like a grandparent, right? Or maybe you're an older aged parent of teens, like maybe you're in your 50s or 60s and you have teens, right? So really talking to them, and they really respond when it's more like a family value. We're doing this because, you know, we're law-abiding citizens, or, you know, we have this immunocompromised, so we have to think about the bigger picture. And then some natural consequences, like you have to let them try first, right? So I want to go with my friends. Okay, so are you going to practice your physical distancing? Are you wearing a mask? If those things don't happen, then a natural consequence, like, well, now you have to quarantine for 14 days. Right? Or if you want to go do this thing with your friends, and you have to get a nasal swab and be tested negative. So these are natural things that everyone else is also doing, right? If you're going to go to this or that, there's a quarantine, or there's an option to do a nasal swab now, like that's pretty accessible, you know, before and after whatever event you're participating in. So really being really clear about what your family's decision is about bubbles and who they're interacting with and who you're letting in. And the clearer you can be and have this discussion, and then do not waver on that boundary.
So when parents are thinking about making these boundaries with their family, is it important how important is it to bring the teen into the conversation up to the point where that boundary gets set? Should the parents be saying, this is how we're going to do it in our family, here's the line? Or is it helpful to say, like, here's what we're thinking of doing, what's going to be helpful for you, and involving the children in creating those family rules, family values, family boundaries?
100%, as much as you can involve them, the better they're going to also respond to said boundary. Because let's also remember, as parents, it's kind of our job to set like the most important boundaries. Like it's our job to hold those. It's also their job to push against them and see where that boundary is.
Yeah.
That's each of our jobs right now as a parent and a teen, right? Like, so that's real. But the more success we have with making and creating those boundaries and keeping it as less intense as possible is to involve them 100%. Ask their opinion. It's also really great practice for them to practice that like decision making and consequence rationalization, because they don't yet have a prefrontal cortex, which means they can't do that higher level decision making. That part of their brain really isn't developed until their mid-20s. Right? So, but how they develop that and how they practice that is through practice. So having that opportunity to sit down with them and at least tell them your thought process. Like, this is why I've said this boundary is important, because of grandma and, you know, your little sister who maybe has an immune issue. That's really important for our family to keep these boundaries. We understand that other families are doing it different. That's their choice. And each family is going to have different reasons for why they're choosing to abide by it in certain ways. And then ask for feedback. And then they can get creative and like, okay, you still want to see your friends, obviously. How can we do it and still fit in the boundaries? It's totally possible. You can hang out, since the weather's still great too, right? You can be outside, or you can choose to mask. Or like I said, if you wanted to go, I've had a couple of teens and they wanted to go away to cottage together. They're a bit older, so they're more like 17, 18, but they all nasal swabbed before they went, made sure they all had negative COVID tests. And then they made sure that they were negative before re-entering their homes and bubbles.
Yeah.
right? So that's a total possible way of maintaining the boundary and they still get what they want. So it's really keeping that dialogue open of like, everything is always a question, everything is always a discussion. And it really long-term helps them practice that decision-making field or process. And like
using this as an opportunity to teach those life skills and support cognitive development in a way that builds, like at this age, you're building those neural pathways. You're helping your children learn what to do with that part of their brain as it develops.
Absolutely.
Erin, I just love that approach so much.
And it's hard. I'm not saying like, oh, you're just going to walk in
exhausting.
and fluidly, you know, do this. No. And it's not going to be just one conversation. It's going to be hundreds of conversations, and they're also going to mess up.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where it just comes to like holding a natural consequence, not punishing and like taking things away. It's try to find that natural consequence of like, okay, you slipped up. And usually with teens, especially if they've come and confessed, they already know they messed up. You don't need to add a layer of punishment. Like, yes, you told me. Okay, let's problem solve. What could you have done differently? Let's use this opportunity to learn from it. And the best thing parents can do if your teen's into it is like role play, right? Because peer pressure is a thing. So let's say they're going out to a social event where you're like, I really want you to maintain distance. Is people gonna be wearing masks? Like, what's the scenario? But what if it's a peer pressure situation and the other teens are taking off their masks or they're choosing not to? What is your team going to do in that situation? Role play it out. Give them lines so they have it in their back pocket. You know, let them blame it on you. Make the boundaries so they can be like, you know what, my mom or my dad is really, I'm going to be grounded or whatever. Like, give them things to say, give them an excuse so they don't have to think about it in the moment when they're already under peer pressure, and they can just throw you under the bus. Yeah. Because you don't care if they're friends like you. Right? Like, give them those opportunities so that when they're also in those situations where they don't have that quick access to that decision-making thing and they're going to give into peer pressure, give them the lines.
So they've got those like rote memorized. Like, oh, my mom's super strict about COVID. I heard the phrase COVID crazy the other day. And I was like, my mom's COVID crazy. Like, she'd just lose it. It's not worth it.
Exactly. Right. So give them like, throw me under the bus. Here's your lines. Like, let's role play it. Like, what if your friend says this, your friend does this? And this is not just for COVID, but for like when they're at a party and there's drugs or alcohol, practice those scenarios, right? Practice role play. Like, hey, what are you going to do if? What are you going to do if? And let them practice that and be like, okay, and then if you choose this, what could that potentially look like? Help them like, and work on that imagination of like, what could this look like if you were to do it like this? It also helps reduce their anxiety when going out into these situations, because they kind of have a little toolkit of like, okay, I already know what to say, I already know what to do. And they don't have to worry about it as much.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've seen a lot of my my teen patients with anxiety are really hurting from the lack of connection with their peers right now, especially with the social distancing. You know, even if they are able to get together, it's not necessarily as much as they were getting together before. And I think of like how much this was a problem in youth mental health before the pandemic. You know, one of my interests is, of course, in anxiety. And, you know, I'm following just like the amount of time teens spend doing different activities now compared to, you know, decades previously. And what they're really missing out on, even before we went into lockdown, is that actual unstructured time in the same physical space with other teenagers. And that time has just been like slipping away. What are you doing? Or how can we support teens right now in replacing that, knowing that whatever we do doesn't actually replace that unstructured time being in the same physical space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we really have to get creative, and you might have to, like, that's the reality of it. It's like, okay, what can we do? How can we do things in the space? Like, how can we maintain this connection? And really, like, moving things virtually right now is kind of where it's at. And pushing them to try it. And that's always the hardest, because often they don't want to do it. They're like, no, that's not the way it was. I don't want to do that. And really trying to use every parenting skill you can to convince them to try it. Because usually once they try the new thing, they end up liking it and they find it helpful and they can find connection. Because you really do have to push them to do that, whether it's like, you know, hang out in a backyard or, you know, letting them go to the park and giving them that opportunity to go to the park and practice. And one thing actually I heard someone else say is a lot of the teens didn't have the same practice that we, the adults, had because we were doing the grocery shopping. So we were able to practice what social distancing even looks like because we had stickers on the ground that said, oh, this is how far apart you have to be. They never got that for the most part. They weren't doing their grocery shopping or going into the stores. They were staying home. Right. So also giving them that practice. So first, let's do something in the backyard where I can help you eyeball what 6 feet looks like. Right. And if that's successful, let's take it. Then I will let you go on your own and we don't have to supervise you and you can do something in the park. Because having that kind of unsupervised time with their friends is also important.
Yeah. No, and I think,
right.
You know,
and we have to let them practice that skill and practice that.
So taking a chance of the good weather and having people outside and whether that's at the park or whether, you know, you're working to make your backyard a place where your teen wants to be and wants to have their friends there. If you have access to a backyard is a good way to look at that as well.
And luckily they are going back to school in a capacity where they will see friends and they'll see people. And I think that's really going to help. And then they're in a setting where they're going to get the practice. Now there's going to be stickers and they're going to practice the distancing and they're going to get more comfortable with connecting in a different physical realm. And I think luckily this is happening going into winter. So they're going to kind of be able to have this practice in an indoor space, which is going to be really, really valuable for their mental health for sure.
Yeah. I have one last question, and I know that you've got to go because you've got little ones and childcare and all that good stuff. But I've been talking to, what about the kids that aren't going back to school? So I've been talking to some parents whose kids want to go back to school, but because of their family decision-making, they've decided that those kids are not going back to school. They're going to be doing virtual schooling.
Totally.
Any thoughts on for those parents that are maybe struggling with that situation?
Yeah. So you're going to have to really support finding them social outlets somehow. If it can't be in a school space, and is there any opportunity to go to another space or make sure they at least have a couple of friends that they can see in your front yard or backyard or like on the street if you don't have a backyard? If there's some way that your family can find a comfortable, safe way for that to happen, because it is really important. And then luckily, I mean, teens are into social media. So if you have a younger teen where maybe they weren't on social media before, maybe now it's time not to like open the gates of social media, but give them some kind of device so they can converse with their friends. You know, like, is there some way that they can keep connected, that they can stay in touch, they can do video chats or something to maintain that, because it is really important. Especially if they're not going to have that in person. And then they're going to be facing, like, because some of their friends are probably in school and there's going to be the FOMO thing happening, right?
No, for sure. And that's exactly, you know, some of the challenges that I've heard from teens who are not going back is that they want to go see their friends. And if that's not within, you know, the family values, family risk management to have those kids go back, you know, sometimes it's fine and sometimes it's a point of tension. So
it's absolutely a point of tension. And like I said, like, staying true to family values is important. And teens get that. They're not going to like it. And if that's a choice your family has to make, it's just like, do everything you can to support them connecting with friends and like, and then let them have those big feelings. Like, they're going to be disappointed. They're going to feel left out. They're going to feel a lot of big things going into that. And have extra patience if it's at all possible, because when they're having those big feelings, they're not going to come just like, oh, I'm just so sad today. They're not going to do it like that. Right. They're going to withdraw. They're going to get snippy. They're going to, you know, they're going to show that in different ways, because they're also still learning how to express those emotions in a tactful way. So kind of holding space of like, I know this is so hard for you. And I know you're not purposely being mean because you feel like being mean to me, but you're having a hard time. Right. And really coaching them through that if you need support, reach out and help coach them through these big feelings and help them process it. Yeah. Because it's normal to have things that happen to you or through your life that's hard and difficult. That's okay. How can we coach them through it and deal with the trauma of this, right? How can we get them through the other side with some kind of emotional resiliency and just really making sure they're supported? And if it's not you, find their practitioner, whether it's a therapist or a naturopath or their GP or some other adult that they have a healthy connection with that can walk them through this if you, the parent, can't walk them through this. Like, that would be my big recommendation, is making sure they have a support so that they're not like, you know, anxiety and depression aren't getting more intense for them.
Absolutely. No, making sure that they've got enough support that things are moving forward, and that this unfortunate situation of having this global pandemic is like used as a tool to build resiliency. You know, that is, I think, the best we can do right now. And I think, you know, we all wish our kids were building resiliency in other ways. But this is happening. So let's use it to prepare them for other things.
Exactly.
Erin, I know you post a lot of great things on your Instagram, but if parents want to connect with you, learn more about you, just where can we send them?
Yeah, the best place is probably Instagram. It's at Dr. TeWinkel, and my last name is TeWinkel. People always want to do LE, but it's KEL. And actually in my link in bio, I do have like a free 5-day challenge, and it's more about like how to connect with your teen. I actually did it during COVID, so it's COVID related, and it talks more about what we kind of touch on, is the brain development and how that works, and what's this emotional regulation you're talking about, and how do we work on these things with our teen. That's kind of a challenge, and I just send you videos each day for like 5 days and kind of little tips more on what we talked about, so they can go ahead and grab that. And also this fall, I'm doing a group program for teens, and you also can get information on that in my link in bio. And it's, I mean, virtual right now because everything's virtual, but it's there as a way to have for them to have access to support. So myself and a colleague are co-hosting it. We run it together. And then it's a group of about 10 other, it's for females right now, so 10 other female identifying teens. And it gives them a space to talk, but also we're educating them on like the foundations of health and periods and sleep and proper fueling and all of these things. So the parents get the content, but then we have a private space for the girls to support each other. So we're helping build these little pockets and pods of people who can support each other.
Oh, that's such a great resource, especially, you know, for parents, if they do have a teen that's feeling more isolated right now, who could use some health education. So thank you for doing that. And we'll definitely link to those things below this video when it's on Facebook and the IGTV. Definitely head over to Dr. TeWinkel's page and check those out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for having me. And I wish everyone just luck and patience.
Yes. We'll send out blessings of patience to all parents with teens today and especially this month. All right. Thanks so much, Erin.
100%. Okay. You're welcome. Take care.